We are reconvening at about 1:33 or 4 or 5. Item number 8 on our agenda is other business reserved for matters the chair did not reasonably anticipate at the time of posting. We got a belated request from the Thoroughbred Horseman to come before the commission to ask for, decided that, as we've said repeatedly, within the rules, within the law, within the statute, if we can be helpful to the horsemen, to Suffolk Downs, to try to keep thoroughbred racing going, we want to do that. So I felt that in that spirit it was appropriate to waive the time constraint and invite the horsemen in to make their proposal. We've not had a chance yet but we felt they deserve the right to make their pitch as they're trying to figure out how to salvage horse racing. So I'm going to just move the schedule around a little bit and invite the representatives from the New England Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association to come on up. For those of you who thought you were going to be next on the agenda, thank you for being patient, but they said they would be quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, we express our appreciation for the opportunity to be here. I'm Attorney Frank Frisoli. I'm General Counsel to the NEHPBA. With me is Bruce Padden, the Executive Director, and Anthony Spady, the President of the NEHPBA. Two matters that we sent letters to the Commission about. As the Commission may be aware, the NEHPBA has been endeavoring to continue horse racing in Massachusetts, notwithstanding the decision of Suffolk Downs to shut its doors and not conduct thoroughbred racing further. So in that vein, we had been negotiating at length with Suffolk Downs, trying to lease the facility. I just want to note that if the industry does not proceed, we've all heard projections as to the loss of jobs. We've heard estimates from something like 1,400 at Suffolk Downs alone, you know, and maybe more than a couple thousand in the industry. And we're trying to avert that day. We have explored every possibility of proceeding in different down there to look at it. We've explored the possibility, as you know, Mr. Carney has submitted a conditional application for 2015 to conduct 2 15-day meets. That facility has very small, tight turns. It's a safety issue, which I will come back to in a minute. There appears to be a considerable state of disrepair. It's been a while since it's been used. It would require a cash infusion, and whether they're prepared to make the necessary funding. And even if they did, I think that the Commissioner, Ms. Jennifer Durenberger, has already expressed concerns about the safety issue of that track. You know, the tight turns, we've had some tragic incidents even at Suffolk Downs. I know Mr. Baez ended up crippled when he went down on a turn because they were crowded. Those kind of things are far more facility. So in any event, the two matters that were put before you is that, as you're aware, we applied for a license for 2015 for 1 day with the intent of, if we could get a lease with Suffolk Downs, of expanding that to 65 days. For a number of reasons, we deemed it necessary to form a new entity to be the license holder in that is owned and controlled by the NEHPBA, with a minority interest being held by the Mass Thoroughbred Breeders Association, because they're on board. We're working together to save racing in Massachusetts. So we are looking to transfer the license that, the 1-day license that was approved, to this new organization, and we've supplied that. I know you need to do the background checks, get the appropriate legal opinions, do the background checks, and then rule on them, but we wanted to put this on the table and move forward in that. The second issue is the issue of simulcasting in Massachusetts. And under applicable state law at the present time, Suffolk Downs did not apply for a license in 2015, and as we read the legislative relief. When we were negotiating with Suffolk Downs to lease the facilities, we had made considerable progress. We were optimistic we were going to reach some agreement that would be subject to the review and approval of this commission. And abruptly, those discussions ended when Suffolk Downs announced that they were sponsoring legislation, or filing legislation, which would allow them to simulcast thoroughbred racing. We advised them we're opposed to that for a number of reasons. What we're looking for from this commission is that under Chapter 311 of the Acts of 2014, the racing licensee, which would be us with this one-day license at the moment, would have the authority to simulcast if they race 65 days in the interest of the health and safety of horses, riders, and drivers. And what I would suggest is that there is a real safety issue if we can't race at Suffolk Downs and racing at some other facility. Brockton appears to be the only viable alternative at present. What we are looking for is approval to reduce the number of live days required to race next year to 1 or 0 casting, then have the right to simulcast. And the reason this is important is twofold. First, as the commission may have heard, we have already engaged counsel and we're looking at a long-term solution to racing in Massachusetts. I believe of the 25 major cities in the U.S., the only one that doesn't have racing is Atlanta, and they're talking about building a track there. So Boston, for a very large city, with everywhere else. Second, the situation here is such that we believe the dynamics of this is that were we to secure the approval and have the right to simulcast next year, we would propose to engage Suffolk Downs to be our agent to conduct that, again with your approval, and would be able to resolve this whole issue in Massachusetts in Boston at a location that is populated, it is, you know, profitable, and the profits would then go partially back into horse racing. It would go into funding purses down the road, it would go into funding perhaps a new entity to buy, develop, and own a racing facility. Well, that's what we're looking at now. So it just seems to us, dedicated in us being successful in our efforts, and that the equities of the situation are that whatever revenue is generated from the horse racing industry, at least partially inure to the benefit of continuing racing in Massachusetts. So that's what that's what we're asking for. And as I said, our negotiations were, we were optimistic we were going to make a deal until Suffolk premiums. The proposal was, the first draft of legislation was, they simulcast, they keep all the money, nothing goes to purses. And I would suggest that if were we to get the approval we're seeking, that the revenue would be equitably divided. We've been negotiating with them every year for purses, and we've always reached agreement except for 1 year. And we would expect that if we were in a position where the Suffolk is looking for what they're going to do with the facility in the interim as they ponder development plans, and the long-term objective on our end is to have some place to go in a couple of years, being able to fund and build a place, and in the short term, continue with Suffolk Downs. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody? Questions?
You mentioned Chapter 311 of the Acts of 2014. Is that enacted legislation, or is that draft proposed legislation?
That was approved September 9, 2014.
And in what context, please expound again on that point you made on that legislation, please.
Yes. It gives Suffolk Downs, being the racing licensee, the ability to simulcast, provided they race a minimum of 65 days. That's what the law requirement used to be 100. 100, it got reduced to 65. And it gives the Mass Gaming Commission the authority to reduce the number of live races, or live racing days, in the interest of the health and safety. That first of all, the health and safety issue has always been a paramount issue to our horsemen. Protecting the jockeys, the riders, these people, they're earning a living and they put their lives at risk. You know, we feel we have an obligation to do everything we can to make the track safe for them. We see a major problem doing that turns are very tight, the track is not very wide, the horses get on top of each other, they clip heels, somebody goes down and gets hurt. So we're very concerned about that, and I have heard
Right.
Ms. Durenberger address that as well. She is likewise concerned. She's expressed concern from the standpoint of her position. And so what I am indicating is that given that we can't conduct live racing, that we're asking you to exercise your authority and say that we have a license, we intended to race 65 days, we're precluded from circumstances outside our control, namely we can't reach an agreement with Suffolk as of yet to race there, and we don't have a viable alternative. Racing at Brockton could be dangerous. We have a problem. Lessens the exposure. Running a long-term meet there, certainly from our perspective, you know, is an accident waiting to happen. And so we'd ask you, under your authority here, and this, I'm sure this is going to be reviewed by your council, to abrogate, to reduce the number of racing days to either 1 or 0. I would also tell you it's our expectation that Suffolk, the thing that seemed to be the impediment in stopping us was Suffolk, you know, perceiving that they might have this authority to simulcast without us. And, you know, the unfortunate thing about thoroughbred racing is that when you race live, the revenue does increase, but the added cost of generating that revenue exceeds the additional revenue. So in the ideal world, you simulcast, but the other side of the coin is that if you don't race live enough, you don't have a horse population, you don't have a fan interest, and the sport dies.
You defeat the whole purpose, right?
When was that legislation passed again?
September 9, 2014. I do have a copy.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Well,
No.
we've got it.
No,
I know you've been in discussion with our general counsel, and we will look to her, and her appreciate the urgency, and we will get on it and be back to you when we can.
The one thing I want to add to is that you have these ADWs, these places such as ExpressBet, TVG, and Twin Spiders, where people start an online account, and all of these entities end up entering into a contract with a racing licensee within the state, whereby a portion of that revenue is paid to that racing licensee. So in the past, Suffolk Downs has had these contracts with them. The revenue from them has been shared. Under our contract with Suffolk, it's been shared by us. We are now in a position, being the only racing license, be a source of revenue independent of any funding that comes through the Gaming Commission, or any funding that comes from wagering there. That revenue would be devoted by us towards developing a new facility in Massachusetts to conduct thoroughbred racing. And so to be able to do that, we need to have a racing license and we need to have a simulcasting license.
But wouldn't Suffolk Downs?
From what I have seen, doesn't have a racing license and it's too late for them to apply. So under the applicable law, they're not eligible to enter into these contracts that I can see from my standpoint.
No, I know, but
Yeah.
you mentioned that you would want to engage in some kind of agreement with them.
Oh, certainly, that is money on the table. If we were able to race, that is money we're happy to invest in racing now, as opposed to.
There's one other scenario I want to at least make you aware of that I think is extremely important. The mass breeders are those are the people, the farmers that have been here, and their farms are here, they're stationary. They can't pick up and move those farms to go any other place. The problem that I have as being the president of all horsemen is that not all horsemen breed mass breds. Many horsemen have horses that can race quality to be able to race other places. So the big dilemma and the big picture is that we have people that have mass breds and that have farms. This is their lives. They've been here 40, 50, 60 years. These horses, if they don't race, many of them, in the next 2 or 3 years, some of them that are 3-year-old and 4-year-old, running, and I mean that, they're out of business. They are closing or selling and developing their property. The problem I have is Brockton Fair, whether it be safe or not, gives them the ability to run some of those mass breeds and earn money so that they can exist and live. Because the mass breeders program financially of the safety issue. But you just think of this.
Right.
62 mass bred farms, many of us are sitting on those farms that don't have the ability to go any other place. Mares, stallions, the revenue that they would generate by being able to run from revenue from the mass breeders, which is a separate entity and a separate pool, and no way to earn.
And we're very much familiar with these issues, as you know, and we've bumped a bunch of people to put you on, so I want to move on. But thanks for coming in, and we
Thank you
will
for listening.
take this under advisement.
And I want to thank Council Catherine Booth for taking the time to speak to me the other day.
Okay, pleasure.
Thank you.
That's what she's there for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Ombudsman Ziemba.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First up is, we met on Tuesday. It was the third meeting of the GPAC, what we call it. The meeting primarily focused on a few different areas. The Commission's research agenda. Director Vanderlinden will give you a little bit more of an update on that during his presentation. And then we also focused on the GPAC subcommittees and the Community Mitigation Fund. In regard to the subcommittees and the Community Mitigation Subcommittee of the GPAC and the Local Community Mitigation Advisory Committees, and generally all of those entities are advisory committees that provide advice to the Commission on a range of gaming issues, but among them is the use of the Community Mitigation Fund dollars. We also discussed that given the timing of the recent category, potential impacts from such facilities will not yet be fully realized by the statutory application date of February 1st for the Community Mitigation Fund. So as we described at our last meeting, we're in a situation where by February 1st, we will not have as many substantial impacts as perhaps we will have in future years. So as a result, we discussed at our last meeting, which would essentially take away the February 1st deadline for the communities that we described and make it in more of a rolling basis award. At the committee meeting, we discussed this reserve with the GPAC members, and during the last couple of weeks, I've also sent copies of our plan to all the regional planning agencies. We didn't receive any recommendations for amendment from the GPAC members. In addition, I didn't receive any further refinements from the regional planning agencies regarding the draft guidelines that are before you today. In general, I think that there is an understanding of the peculiarities of where we are, given the timing of the licenses and the timing of the referendum. Will undergo substantial revision in the future, and we hope that the substantial revision will involve a lot of discussion at the committees, at the subcommittee, and at the local community mitigation advisory committees. Especially as we get towards operations of each of these facilities, we'll take a look at the range of impacts that are possible with these facilities and what priorities we should entertain in future years. So in many ways, we thought that it might be problematic that we have a February 1st deadline. In many ways, it's really creating an opportunity the way that we've constructed the draft guidelines. It will basically allow all of these committees and local communities to have almost a full year of review before we get into the true impacts into the 2016 program. And as we discussed before, there's a limited amount of funding available for the first few years from the tax revenues on the gaming revenues, which will obviously take place after they're operational. So that $17.5 million has to last basically through 2017. So within that lens, we have the community mitigation guidelines that are before you in the application, which, based on the input or lack of recommendations to date, seeming year, with the caveat that they'll undergo substantial revision, potentially as we get into operational issues, or even as we examine the construction-related issues going into the next year. So one thing you'll note from these draft guidelines is that we have incorporated Commissioner Stebbins' recommendation that in regard to the planning grants for the reserve fund, that we have some in-kind or other community funds that would go along with any planning funds the commission puts forward to a community. And I think that we would definitely be flexible with communities on what they can commit. Again, many of the communities are smaller communities without fully staffed planning offices, and so to the extent that they can provide some services on planning, I think that that would go a long way to make sure that they're committed, at the last meeting. So in addition to that revision, there are two questions that remain. One is February 1st is the statutory application deadline, but February 1st happens to be Sunday. So what should we do about that? I don't see any in the statute. There's no specific provision already under our regs for the rest of our program. That might be a possibility, or we could just have delivery by email on that Sunday. Communities could submit them either on Friday, or they could submit them on Sunday to us through email, and that would certainly be acceptable. And then the other outstanding question, as I take it from the last meeting, is that the amount of the reserve, $100,000 for each of the communities identified in our draft guidelines. That would be approximately $2.4 million. But there are other approaches certainly that could be discussed by the commission, such as a population-based approach or other approaches where you differentiate between communities. One final matter that goes along with the reserve amount in the draft guide, specific mitigation request, and they also take advantage of the reserve, which is just a simple check on a one-pager that they'd submit to the commission. That I had recommended if there was a $100,000 reserve for communities, that if a community also asks for a specific impact, that they should have to use at the maximum of. But given however we set the reserve amount, that might need to change. But that's just sort of a footnote to our reserve discussion.
Thank you. Comments, questions, thoughts?
I thought that there was and maybe we can check, I thought that there was something in Chapter 4 that says that if a deadline falls on a weekend, right? Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was looking at that earlier in this meeting. I didn't find it. There's, for specific holidays, if they fall on a Sunday, it can go to the next business day, but it didn't say generally for Sundays. But
I thought it was weekend. Anyway.
I could have missed it.
I mentioned last time, and I would like to just bring it up again. That idea is a good one. I think it strikes us all. But I'm a little troubled by the idea of having the same amount for everybody. I did some calculations just to satisfy my own interest, and the biggest disparity is in terms of population is between Boston and Wilbraham. Money, even though Boston has over 600,000 people and Wilbraham has 4,000. And I recognize that the smaller communities don't have the staff that larger communities do, and therefore the small problems may be more difficult to solve for a smaller community than the bigger problem is for a bigger community. They may about taking that pool that you talked about, which is basically the 25 or 24, however many communities they are, 24 times 100,000, and saying everybody gets 50,000 or 25,000, but then they get the balance of the pool based on population. It's not that hard a calculation to do. A fairer and more sensitive way of executing this really good idea. But so I put that out. That would mean if we did 50,000, and I used 22 communities as opposed to 24. Cambridge, for example, would get 131,000, and Wilbraham would get 53,000. If you used a 50,000, the amount you wanted. But
Did you do that on your own?
yeah.
Wow.
I'm going to argue the counterpoint to that. because the purpose of this grant is, first of all, a reserve, and it's for planning purposes. The planning, I don't think, is population-based. You, at least what I'm understanding in terms of to do a study, a baseline, or engage consultants and lawyers, or whatever the case may be, and that's not going to be necessarily impacted by the amount, or the amount of population may not be a factor into those planning activities.
What is another, maybe what you're saying is the issue of the impact on a community is not necessarily driven by its size. In other words, Wilbraham might have a terrible problem, whereas Cambridge has a tiny little problem.
That's another element. Yeah,
Right, doesn't really have anything to do with
No,
the
no.
size of the community. It has to do with the size of the impact.
No, but I think we're confounding two things. What would be the actual mitigation, and what is the purpose of this grant, as I understand it, which is a small portion of the mitigation monies here, as I understand the proposal, is to figure out just what those impacts might be, and which may vary on a number of factors, not just population. But if I have to engage a consultant or a set of consultants, that to engage them. The difference, which we talked about last time, and you mentioned again, is that some communities large have a lot more resources than some communities small. And that, to me, is the biggest reason to treat them all the same. That's an equalizer in terms of the universe of communities that we have here. Furthermore, the way could be rolled over into an actual mitigation, as you suggest. And we could argue as to whether 100,000 is sufficient or too big or too little, but it's merely just recognizing that there is some money available that can be tapped into, but it's not going to be exclusive for that. To go about engaging consultants or using their own resources for the actual mitigation. So I think trying to figure out something based on population just does not operate here.
Well, I was using, there is no direct relationship between population and the problem. I was using population as a proxy for likely complexity of the planning process. It's the moon, but this
No,
one
we
seemed
could use, for example, the budget deficits.
Right.
How are they on
right. I've made my point. and
the size of their budgets?
But we're not going into this blind. We know it's not, there's already been surrounding community agreements. There's been a lot of talk on potential impacts. And for example, we know there'll be significant impacts to Boston, which is the biggest. Looking at population, because of, that's a known fact. There will be numerous impacts, and planning will be more.
But
Already is proving to be more difficult.
But that goes, in my view, to an argument towards the later part of the community mitigation funds, which is the actual mitigation. We're only talking at this point about the size of the grant being.
Well, Commissioner, as you mentioned, it's planning purposes or it's a reserve for impacts, as you mentioned.
Which is on a rolling basis, and it's only the beginning. You could argue that given the size of construction, not population, but the actual dollar amounts that the construction activity is going to bring, that by itself has a bigger factor in terms of the construction.
I could certainly go either way on this. I kind of prefer the flat number. I think there's an inverse relationship between the size of the community and how badly you need help. So the fact that it seems a little bit odd, is fine with me. But I wouldn't go to war on the point. So, Commissioner Stebbins, do you have an instinct one way or the other?
I mean, I wrestled with this up with some ratios, some percentage, and I think we're somewhat handcuffed by the fact that individual hosts and surrounding community agreements have already potentially overcompensated some communities based on potential impacts with more money than other communities. What we're really trying to do is incentivize some of these communities to think outside the box. If a smaller community, and because we mentioned Wilbraham wants to be more aggressive and really be more thoughtful than maybe the city of Boston does, then I wouldn't necessarily want to handcuff Wilbraham from being able to pursue a project. We're going to be mindful of whatever they're calculating their budget out. It's not just going to say, come and get your $100,000 without some idea of what your budget is for your planning. They're simpler, easier to manage if we just stick with one flat amount. And that kind of takes the size of community, pre-existing hosts and surrounding community, facts, figures, agreements out of the equation, so to speak. And I think it makes it a lot easier for you, Mr. Zamba, to manage.
It seems like we have three that kind of lean towards the, probably I'll just leave it that way on it.
And Council Blue has solved the other issue. We found that provision, Chapter 4, Section 9.
Section
Yes, that's right.
Better finder than me.
Right.
Does that say you can carry it over?
Helps to have a lockdown brain judge.
Moves it to Monday?
And a quick, and good counsel.
So are we prepared? I think we all think this is a great idea, and we've resolved the one variable. Are we ready to have a motion? We do need a motion, I think.
Mr. Chairman, if you could just reserve the authority within me to make any sort of minor scrivener changes, like I noticed this morning that I have a contact point, but I didn't tell them where to send the actual application.
So, since our address is going to change, maybe that's all the more important.
That's right.
Yeah, I actually had a minor point on that, but this was really typographical, so
Okay.
I go along with that as well, if we reserve minor points.
Somebody want to frame a motion?
I would move that the commission, I guess we are only addressing the question of the amount because we answered the question about the due date, but a set-aside figure of $100,000 for each host and surrounding community agreement for their reserve.
Commissioner, the proposal was limited to the surrounding communities, nearby agreement communities, and communities that petition to be a surrounding community.
How about the
Host communities were not.
contained in the proposal?
Communities contained in the proposal.
My typographical,
licensing.
right.
Of a
because-
gaming licensee. In that amount to equal $100,000 and also charge $100,000 and also charge the ombudsman to make any small refinements, corrections, or edits to the document as attached.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
McHugh dissenting. I will say, everybody should know that the Gaming Policy Advisory Committee meeting that John and I think Mary Thurlow organized was terrific. You know, the logistics were well done. We had a lot to get done, and I think people had a good time. It was interesting. Mark and Steve Keel's presentations were good, but mostly, John, you managed the professional. So it made me, optimistic that as we start to roll into a regular schedule and we fill out these committees, that we can really make them meaningful. So, thank you.
It's great. Good job.
One thing I wanted to mention is Chair DiZoglo did a great job at the
yes.
meeting, but unfortunately, we heard some recent news that the former Chair Hubbard just recently died. We're very saddened to hear that news. Upstarted and a sad day.
Terrible.
Rest in peace.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. What's next? Catherine Blue, General Counsel, item number 5.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
The first item in the legal section today is a request for a delegation of authority to Commissioner Cameron to handle racing matters. By way of background, there are certain matters that are generally handled by the judges and the stewards at the track. In the off-season, we don't have sitting judges and stewards, so we would like to delegate authority to Commissioner Cameron to issue a clerk area where those folks are on duty year-round because they do the simulcasting, to issue rulings regarding occupational licensees, to grant stays from rulings, and in particular to grant certain rulings that started during the meet but maybe were completed in the off-season. So for example, sometimes there are medication issues where the testing gets sent out, it's towards the end of the meet, the result comes back and the impact what licensees may or may not do in other jurisdictions. So it's important for us to get those issued, get them on the record, and then make sure the other jurisdictions are aware. So these would just be off-season type matters. They would not supersede any of the judges or stewards during the meet. And we have not in the past actually formally delegated this kind of authority, and we thought it would be good to have it on the record now with a formal delegation.
I'm very comfortable with that notion, but didn't we have already one that have delegated these early on? The very same authority to Commissioner Cameron when we didn't have a racing director?
We probably did, yes.
But this is just to
But this will be
safe.
formal in writing, it'll be in our records.
Okay.
Other comments?
I have no doubt about delegating it to Commissioner Cameron. I'm just not sure
Looked at it. So the first is this medication violation issue. That's easy. The second is the licensing of the parimutuel clerks. So the license is run on a January to December 31st basis.
Right.
The parimutuel clerks are in the facilities because they're there for simulcasting.
Right.
What has happened in the past is we've sort of granted them a temporary license. When the judges and stewards come to sit, they go over them again, but before the judges and the stewards actually rule on their license. So we thought it would be helpful to get them done, you know, subject to the normal background checks that we do and those kinds of issues, rather than having this onslaught when the judges and stewards are seated at the beginning of the meet.
But do we have an onslaught on December 25th or 24th or 23rd?
Happening is that they've been sort of deemed granted as the state police work through the background checks, but never a formal sign-off. These we could get done and out of the way, and they're a fairly important position.
Yeah, I'm only asking these questions to ensure that we're not coming up with a solution to the wrong problem, but I'm not.
Matter in more detail.
Okay.
And just like any other delegation, any appeals come back to the full commission, if at all.
If at all, they would go to the hearing officer first,
Right.
like they do from
Like
the
they
judges
do
and
now.
stewards, and
Yeah.
then back to the full commission, yes.
Yeah.
Further discussion?
Nope.
Someone have a motion?
Sure, I'll be Commissioner Cameron to handle certain racing matters as discussed here.
Second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
And I'll abstain because it has to do with me.
Okay. Commissioner Cameron abstained. All four others voted in favor.
For the commission's consideration of the Section 61 findings for the Plain Ridge facility. So by way of background, when the commission issues a license, a gaming license, they are under the MIPA rules, the agency taking action. And when they do that, they have to review the impact on the environment of the particular project and make findings pursuant to MIPA and pursuant to our statute and our regs. Those files, and so these findings have been included in the FEIR. They were considered by the MIPA office when they granted their certificates. In this particular situation, there were also Section 61 findings filed by the Mass DOT. They are an agency that will be taking a lesser action than the commission because there are permits that they will have to issue too for some of the work. But as part of the whole licensing process, what the commission needs to do now is take the and vote to authorize the staff to file them with the MIPA office. The MIPA office will then post them for 60 days in the environmental monitor. They will look to see if they get additional comments from the public. If they do not get comments, they will come back to the commission. We'll ask the commission to vote to actually formally incorporate them into the licensee's license as conditions of the license. If there are comments that come in, we will review them to determine whether we need to make a change in the Section 61 findings, and if we do, we'll incorporate it. Or we can review them and determine there is no change required. If we do make some changes, we would send them back to the MIPA office to be republished for completeness. And then after that, we would then incorporate them into the license. So this really is sort of the final piece of the licensing process, because there are a lot of things that came from the application and things that you've already considered. And the DOT findings mostly address mitigation, traffic mitigation issues. So today, we're just asking you to authorize staff to file them with MIPA.
Comments? Pretty hard to argue with that.
But we need to do it promptly, so.
Yes.
In the unlikely, right, before
it opens,
the
yes.
operating certificate can be.
So we want to have a large enough time frame, and we do by starting this process now.
Right.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I'd be happy to if I can find exactly.
Go with Section 61 findings.
Yes. I would move that this commission, are we approving the Section 61 findings? It's not in our purview to
You were voting to authorize us to file the findings as
Yes,
provided
right.
with the MIPA office.
thank you. I would move that this commission authorize staff to file with
Section
MIPA.
For
Si-
Springfield Gaming and Redevelopment.
Yes, for Springfield Gaming and Redevelopment with MIPA.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
We will be following the same process for the Category 1s when that time arrives, so this is a good dry run for us. Next on the list, we have, these are for regulations that we are now taking through the formal process or for which we've already filed on an emergency basis.
So you have 4 small business impact statements in the packet. The regulations were already approved by you to start the formal process. The Racehorse Development Fund in 149, the supplemental emergency. But we just need you to vote on the impact statements so we can file them with the Secretary of State.
Any issues, questions?
No.
We just do them one time?
We can, yes.
Do we have a motion? Commissioner
I
Stevens?
move that the commission approve the small business impact statements as provided in the packet for the.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you, Council Holmes.
And next up, we have Mr. Grossman.
Here before you to discuss the standing tax withholding issue that you may recall the Commission discussed in the context previously of legislative adjustments that the Commission recommended and indeed submitted a memo to legislative leadership on. And specifically, it involves the withholding of on proceeds. I'm here before you today ultimately to seek your consent and approval to submit what is referred to as a request for a ruling to the Department of Revenue, seeking a clarification of a letter that they issued previously discussing the issue. And before I get into it in any detail, I should just point out that the interpretation that we're seeking, it seems, would not be a complete fix to the issue. It would resolve a large percentage of the issue, but the point being that legislative assistance is still important in, when it comes to resolving this issue completely. Ultimately, what happened here is that the Department of Revenue, January of 2013, It discussed some tax issues that were brought about by the enactment of the Gaming Act. Specifically, it discussed what effect Chapter 62B, Section 2 had on federal law. And what it did is it talked about two areas in which you're familiar with. The first one is that it removed the federal exemption from withholding on proceeds derived from slot machine winnings of $600 or greater. So in Massachusetts, the withholding law would apply to proceeds derived from slot machines. And secondly, it reduced the threshold at which the withholding would kick in dollars in proceeds or greater. And those were the only two adjustments, if you will, that the Department of Revenue noted in its TIR in February of 2013. So what we would like to do now, with your approval, is write to DOR, and this is the method that they have suggested is the appropriate vehicle to initiate an interpretation that the $600 withholding threshold only kicks in when the proceeds are based upon a winning of 300 times as large as the amount wagered. The 300 times as large as the amount wagered language comes from the Internal Revenue Code. So under federal law, for withholding to be required, there have to be two things that happen. One, there has to be proceeds of at least $5,000. And secondly, the amount of the proceeds have to be at least 300 times as large as the amount wagered. If either one of those are not in existence, there would be no withholding on it. Put a finer point on it, we're trying to clarify that here in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts general law did not read out the 300 to 1 provision, that we still include that in the analysis we do when we determine whether a withholding is required or not. The TIR is unclear on that point, and ultimately this letter requests that specific point. Because DOR did address a number of these other issues in their TIR previously. The effect of it is that if you read the 300 to 1 provision in, it effectively removes, as you may recall from our previous discussion in the legislative context, in that most table games, at least the more common ones, do not pay out at 300 times the amount wagered. So this is a nearly complete fix of that issue as it pertains to table games. As it pertains to slot machines, though, it's a less perfect fix. And it's somewhat unclear exactly what percentage of winnings at slot machines and represent 300 times the amount actually wagered. But it does at least cover a percentage of those types of winnings. So this does fix part of the problem.
Do you have a rough idea?
I've heard different calculations. So, I mean, I don't even think it would be fair to me to guess. I think everyone can agree, though, it's incomplete. So there would still be, certain would still be required at slot machines, which is unlike the federal law where there's a complete exemption from any slot machine winnings.
Right.
And there's only a reporting requirement under federal law, which you're likely familiar with, at $1,200. So that would remain in place. We're not touching that. Mass law doesn't touch that reporting, the federal reporting requirement. It only discusses this withholding requirement. So the point, and it would adopt the position that the commission has taken, then we would include the so-called 300 to 1 provision as part of the analysis when we determine which proceeds are subject to withholding. So ultimately, I'd ask that you if once you're comfortable, delegate authority to perhaps the chair to sign off on the final letter to the Department of Revenue. The letter itself is still in the development stage, kind of fleshing out some of these issues a little more clearly. but it should be complete certainly within the next week.
Questions?
No, I think that I think is the place to focus, and I think it's a very fair reading of what the legislature's done, and I think this is the right approach to solve probably a very high percentage of the problems. It's the only one that can be done non-legislatively, and so I think we ought to take advantage of it, and I think that's the thrust of it, the reading, I think, of the statute.
I agree completely. Yeah, I think you know, it's a very cautious way to proceed, and I think it's very timely that we do this. And depending on the response, you know, we see what happens afterwards.
And Todd has been in touch with all of the licensee request that's coming from the Gaming Commission.
Yes.
Not from the licensees.
Right.
I agree. I think this took some good lawyering on your part, but I agree with Commissioner McHugh that it seems to make good sense.
Good and long analysis, very careful analysis.
Have you had initial conversations but they want a formal letter from us? Is that
Rulings, and this, it was
Right.
pointed out that this is really the appropriate vehicle if we're doing it, to get a formal opinion.
right? Okay. Yep, makes sense.
Mr. Chair, I would move that we give you the authority to sign the appropriate letter to the Department of Revenue as drafted by the staff.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Good job. Now we have Director Wells of the Investigations and Enforcement Bureau.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. The first item on the agenda this morning for the IEB is the qualifier report for Anton Nicodemus.
This afternoon.
Oh, this afternoon, that's right. Day's getting away from ability investigation for Mr. Nicodemus. You have been provided with the complete report. In June of 2014, Mr. Nicodemus was promoted at MGM Resorts International to be the Chief Operating Officer of Regional Operations of MGM Resorts International Operations Incorporated, a direct subsidiary of MGM Resorts International located in Las Vegas, Nevada. As such, Mr. Nicodemus will be responsible of Nevada. As a result, Blue Tarp Redevelopment LLC's project in Springfield and Mr. Nicodemus's position and connection to the project, he was determined to be an individual qualifier for the MGM Springfield license. Mr. Nicodemus submitted all the required forms and supplemental document requests to the IEB, and our investigators conducted a rigorous background check. Areas covered, which you are familiar with, incurred employment history, political contributions, criminal record, references, education, media coverage, directorships and shareholder interests, civil litigation. Was interviewed in person by the IEB State Police and financial investigators as part of the standard qualifier investigation protocol. Investigators also conducted a financial responsibility evaluation with positive results. Mr. Nicodemus attended Arizona State University, where he was awarded a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Management in 1987. As I indicated earlier, he currently works for MGM Resorts International Operations as the President and CEO of Casino Marketing. Before that, from 2007 to 2012, he worked at the Monte Carlo Resort and Casino as the President and COO. Prior to that, in 2007, he worked at the Bellagio Resort and Casino as Senior Vice President of Hotel Operations. Prior to that, he'd been at the MGM Grand Hotel from 2005 to 2007 as Senior Vice President of Hotel Operations and Club as a Resort Manager. The investigation confirmed that Mr. Nicodemus has the following licensing history and current status. The Nevada Gaming Control Board. He has an active registered gaming employee license. He has a Michigan Gaming Control Board qualifying individual license, which is in good standing in Michigan. And he has pending in the Mississippi Gaming Commission and the Maryland Lottery and Gaming Control Agency. The investigation revealed that the licenses were in good standing and all jurisdictions reported no derogatory information related to Mr. Nicodemus's licensure. There were no significant investigative issues uncovered related to Mr. Nicodemus's application for licensure, and overall, he has demonstrated by clear and convincing evidence that the commission find him suitable.
Thank you. Questions?
No, the report was thorough and comprehensive, as it often is. Always is, I should say. And,
No, agreed, clean report.
We have a motion?
Now, I move that we approve Mr. Anton Nicodemus for...
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
The second matter on the IEB agenda, I believe Mr. Lennon is here to actually comment on that.
Good afternoon.
You have in front of you some proposed regulations, first round through. They're very rough drafts. They are the financial reporting requirement regulations as well as the tax reporting regulations. We wanted to get these in the pipeline, get some feedback from you, some comment. One of the things on the IEB, I want to say thoroughly at all. So we want to work with them and the financial investigators on what they think of this, line it with their protocol for what they're thinking about on suitability. And on the tax regs, they are mainly looking at slot operations, and we have to really add some meat to the bones once we figure out whether we're going with a central monitoring system or non-central monitoring system. So it's really just laying out the time. Wanted to put them out there, give you an idea of what we're looking at, some of the concepts we're thinking of, and some of the reports that we're looking for. Do you have anything to add?
If there are any specific questions, we can go through the draft language.
well, I just had a couple of questions with respect to a couple of provisions of 140. I didn't have any questions. 140.022, which is on the first page. And that says the total of all sums actually received. It defines what that includes. And it includes checks received by a gaming licensee, whether collected or not. Why is a part of the amount that the gaming licensee has to pay a tax on? I understand that under our credit regulations, which are in process right now, a check may be deposited as a means of getting an advance from, is security really for repayment of that loan. So that if you deposit a $10,000 check, say, and get a $10,000 line of credit, but only draw down $4,000 and pay the $4,000, I can understand the tax on the $4,000. But I don't understand why the tax should be placed on the 10.
I think, I don't have a direct answer to your question, other than to say that there are a number of interesting nuances in here along those lines that I think we need to take a closer look at. And we'll be interested in hearing some comment from the licensees and others on as to what effect it'll have on the overall tax, talking about some of these issues. So I do think we need to really pick this apart and get a real clear understanding of why or why not. But I don't know.
Where did this come from? Did we just write this whole cloth, or we did adopt it from somebody else?
This is something we put together with our consultants. I believe it's original material by and large. The concepts are ones that
Right.
are.
Just have this language. It's 'cause
It's
on
a
the
good
face
question.
of it, it's an interesting question.
We can certainly look
Yeah.
at whether other jurisdictions treat it the same way.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, I wish we would take another look at that one, and before we put it out for comment, just to see if we can figure out where it came from. The idea of getting people to come, paying a tax on money they didn't have, well, we'd be happy to take their money, but,
I see some smiling licensees out there.
okay, I've made my
Well,
point.
yeah, and part of the thought, we spent quite a bit of time also thinking about the related matter that you're alluding, which is free play, and how that is, you know, just understanding a little bit better, or I would. And it factors into the calculation ultimately, the base of what that tax is going to be on.
That's, I mean, so what Commissioner Coonan is talking about is we were discussing in the next section down, in paragraph 3, the total of all some theory behind why or why not. We would include winnings paid out as a result of promotional play
Right.
in that calculation. So, I mean, that's another area that we really need to look at how other
Right.
jurisdictions handle that. Obviously interested, I mean, I think we know what the licensee's comment on that would be, but not in here right now. That would be something that we would need to include.
Right. Well, and I think, but this goes back to the original point of where, you know, or the question where we got this. I think, I personally think that when we start defining amount played, as opposed to what comes after, which is actual revenue, we start to get into a lot of where free play factors in a different way, and or et cetera. So I'm going to be doing some follow-up on this in addition to whatever we do. But this is an important area that I think we should pay close attention.
But to answer your question, we will look at this, and we have some very prescriptive ones that
Right.
incorporate into this packet that deal specifically with what you're talking about, Commissioner. When do we include it, when don't we include it? And we just didn't have a chance to incorporate that. So we will review this, we'll talk to our licensees, and we will figure out what
Are we set to put, are we talking about these for the first time, or are we set to put these things out for public comment?
This is the informal comment process.
I had, in 2, the last phrase of 2, I also had a question about. Total sums of all, total of all sums actually received includes, and then the last phrase is, gaming vouchers and coupons and documents evidencing credit and debit card chip transactions processed regardless of validity. What does that mean?
Another good question.
That's why this is very
Well, maybe we
informal.
can take another look at that too then. Number 5 on the top of the next page. Total of all sums actually received shall not include the amounts that the gaming licensee can demonstrate were issued to or wagered by patrons of a gaming establishment of any promotion.
I was talking about earlier.
Issued to or wagered by patrons of a gaming establishment resulting from any promotional gaming credit, or?
The sentence doesn't make sense.
Sentence doesn't make sense. Okay, I got the
We
concept.
can
We
reword
can
the
work that.
sentence.
Okay. Okay.
A much simpler way to phrase all of these sections.
I think if we just go down very prescriptive and say,
Yep.
here's what's counted as
Yes.
Right.
the expense
Right,
side, and here's what counted
right.
as the revenue side,
Right.
we can
And then you
eliminate a lot
offset
of
the
these
two.
problems.
Yes.
Right.
So,
Good.
I guess there's no, I think a lot of these issues, in addition, you're asking someone that just doesn't even make sense, but there are really interesting issues involved here, but maybe this, and then have a more substantive conversation.
And then I think what you suggested, Derek, rephrasing them so we don't have
Correct.
all these things in time. I know, together, working on that. So we just have a list of what's in, what's out.
correct.
Quick question on 205 CMR 139. First of all, again, it's a small detail, but I think you got some of the sections misnumbered. Going back to some of the documentation you require, you talked about minutes of board meetings. Are we putting a time frame on I mean, obviously, they're required to hold on to all of the minutes and meetings of shareholders, directors, and members, but we look to the archive if we need it. This is under 139.01. Everything else you say is current. You know, bylaws are obviously a current copy, but minutes of all meetings of shareholders, directors, or members. I don't know if there's a time frame and look. And
I think on the back, on 139.08, don't we get into that?
Yeah, we do have how long they have to maintain.
how far back do we want to go?
Oh. That's a good question. Again,
Yeah, another good one.
how far back will we want them prior to licensing, or how far back we want them to hold on to them?
How long would we want to years? I'm sure 40 years ago, most of that board is no longer with us. Do we really care about what happened? It's just more of a time frame. Again, everything else neatly falls into a category of current, but just saying minutes of all board meetings. Or if we're just looking for access to that information, if and when we need it, that's fine. And then again, it's 138.13, so it's just an edit cleanup.
I don't think we had considered how far back in previous time periods we'd want to look, and I guess that's something we'd have to work with the IAB on.
Yeah.
I know that for current ones, they have to file them with us within 45 days. That's under .08.
I mean, 139. And that was, have we, I think all of our licensees at some level have to file with the SEC.
Well, probably.
And maybe not the operating entity here in Massachusetts, but have we looked at the way this section blends with SEC requirements, so that we're not requiring something in slightly different form that's already being filed with the SEC?
Commissioner Zuniga can handle that one.
Well, actually, that was the other half of the afternoon that we spent talking about this. And the intention is already happening. There's an element here that we need to consider, and that is that the filings at the corporate level may be only one line when it pertains to, say, the Massachusetts operating company or the Massachusetts entity. And in our opinion, we would like to get detail and access as it pertains to Massachusetts that may only be reported at a summary level when it gets filed to on SEC filings. I think that's the gist of it.
You've covered it. I just want to make sure that we are not requiring the same information that's being filed elsewhere, although in a different format. Maybe the Secretary of State gets information as well.
Right.
I don't know.
Or worse, that we're in conflict.
That's under consideration. So
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to talk about the capital expenditure?
Yeah, I think we should. I think this provision covers it, though. But it's a little my question is a little bit nuanced. It's covered under the regulation, but I'll refer my colleagues to 138.13, making a 3.5% expenditure, capital expenditure per year. Of 3.5% of gross gaming revenues, and net gaming revenues. I'm sorry, and I've always been of the mind that it's important on lean years, much like the way our capital trust for racing works. There's a dedicated stream that builds into a trust that then the licensee comes and requests to be making some capital expenditures. But the final sentence, total way, the proviso of we could approve a multi-year plan, so long as he built a reserve. There's an alternative way to establish this by requiring that there's year after year there is a reserve, that is funded, and then there's a multi-year the funding of the reserve. So that's just but the intention of both funding a reserve works in my opinion here, so long as it's tied to a multi-year plan, which we will have approval as well.
So that concept, comment, it's not something that's in the statute, it's an original idea, and I'd be interested in feedback.
Yeah, agreed. Is net gaming revenues a defined term? I think this probably means gross
Yes,
gaming.
No, it's in the statute, it's after your losses, so the net gaming revenues is a defined term.
What is it?
I don't have it, it's not the gross gaming revenues,
It's your profits? 3.5% of your profits?
No, there's some direct cost that gets taken out, not a lot of non-cash costs. For example, depreciation would not be included.
Okay, but it's a defined term there somewhere,
Yeah.
so it's used on purpose.
I think so.
Okay, anything else on this one? So you will be putting these comment period, right?
yes, they're very rough drafts.
But needless to say that the three areas that we've highlighted are ones that we would really like our licensees to pay particular attention to.
Okay. We have a guest from Sport Tech here, I think.
Yes, I'm hoping he could come up front. Also on the agenda this afternoon is a petition by Penn National Gaming to grant the company Sport Tech a temporary gaming vendor primary license. This is the first such petition to come before the commission. As a primary, the commission itself must vote to grant the temporary license per our regulations. The Vice President and General Counsel for Sport Tech in charge of compliance and regulatory affairs for Sport Tech. The IEB has done a preliminary investigation for purposes of the request for the temporary license. A full investigation will be completed at a later time. The preliminary investigation process we have established gives a standard baseline for all the temporary license requests and is comprehensive enough to give the Commission a level of comfort in issuing the temporary license. And that investigation has not raised any concerns at this time. There's one issue related to the issuance of the temporary license I just want to bring to your attention. Ian Penrose, the CEO of Sport Tech, has not yet submitted all materials in order for licensing to determine the application to be complete. Sport Tech and Mr. Penrose have been cooperative with the IEB and have provided sufficient information to satisfy the standard. My recommendation is that should the Commission deem it appropriate to grant the temporary license, that the Commission motion make it clear that the grant of the license is conditioned on Mr. Penrose submitting a complete application as deemed by our licensing division. Once complete, the temporary license would then issue. As Mr. Chesky is here this afternoon, I have asked that he give you a brief overview of the company and its current licenses, and Penn National uses them in a large number of their facilities to provide tote services for simulcasting. It is expected that Sport Tech would provide these services to Plain Ridge Racetrack here in Massachusetts. So I'll just let Mr. Chesky give you an overview of what the company is and what they do and where they're licensed.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Commissioners. Sport Tech is no stranger to betting products and services. We provide countries. We are currently licensed in 34 U.S. states and Canadian provinces. We provide services to a number of racetracks and off-track betting locations throughout the United States. And among the states in which we are licensed are New Jersey, California, and Pennsylvania. As was mentioned, we currently provide tote services, and we're hoping to get a successful launch with Plain Ridge on January 1.
Questions?
So as the general counsel, you're going to make sure that the one individual gets his paperwork in so that we can issue this temporary license?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, in the course of this meeting, I've been told that Mr. Penrose will be submitting his well in advance.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Cameron, do you have a motion?
So are we going to vote on a temporary license provided the appropriate paperwork is submitted? Is that correct?
So the temporary license would issue once Director Acosta deems the license complete. But, so if for whatever reason the information that's submitted we take a look at and there's any concerns, I will immediately bring it to the attention of the commission. So I think that that process should suffice for what we're looking to do today.
So I move that we authorize the licensing division to issue the temporary license to Sport Tech once the appropriate paperwork is in place and deemed complete by the licensing division.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
And the appropriate paperwork is the information required from Mr. Penrose, is that right?
Correct.
I mean, there's no other stuff that's
Nothing
lined
else.
up.
Everything
Okay.
else has been deemed complete
Right.
by licensing.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wells. Let's take a few-minute break. I know it's, Mark needs to set up, and we probably have a
Right.
break, so we'll come back in 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, we are reconvening the 141st meeting, and we are at item number 7, Research and Responsible Gaming, Director Van der Linden.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
That's better.
I'm here with Ken George from well, Marlene Warner. Thrilled to bring before you a proposal for the Massachusetts Gaming Commission to adopt gaming sense. I want to, as usual, try to bring this back to a discussion about the responsible gaming framework and how use of gaming sense fits well within the responsible gaming framework and strategies that the Commission has adopted. Informed decision-making framework, and within that informed decision-making framework, it identifies 3 different types of gamblers: casual gamblers, frequent gamblers, and intensive gamblers. An informed decision-making framework would say that you should make information available through a variety of practices and methods, including displaying materials through the gaming establishment, utilization of play information. I want to emphasize that it's focusing on a variety of practices and methods. But the bottom line of the concept of an informed decision-making framework would say that we need to make sure that patrons, that players have the information that they need in order to make an informed decision about how much they're gambling and if they want to continue to gamble. So, captured within strategy 2 is the responsible gaming information centers. This has been a really interesting issue, the idea of the responsible gaming information centers. It's unique. There really isn't such a thing within the United States. That it's a concept that's been employed in other countries. We've had a lot of really fun discussions about what should these responsible gaming information centers look like. About this with Marlene, going back to the responsible gaming forum that we had in October of 2013. She actually was talking about this, and we were beginning this process of kicking around ideas of what could this space look like, what should it feel like. But really, there are key things that we've kind of honed in on in the response, and we make a strong recommendation that it be located in a central area within the gaming establishment. We say that there needs to be so it needs to be outwardly facing so that it can appeal to the masses, but there is a private area for sensitive conversations and sensitive issues to be discussed. Staff that would be available during peak hours. We also say that that there needs to be back to, we need to make sure that there's a variety of practices and methods that are employed, both within the Responsible Gaming Information Center, but also outside of that responsible gaming. To join us and just talk a little bit about how they have taken this and how they are employing this through PIN, which I think is a fantastic example of partnership that we've been trying to develop here. So, Lance.
Sure. Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon, Lance.
Have just a few comments today, as you can see from the slide. I want to talk a little bit about Penn National's commitment to responsible gaming, and then just a sentence or two on the integration of that space into the overall facility. So to begin, and I guess simply stated, we want our facility to be visited by and enjoyed by customers who have discretionary income to spend on casino entertainment. In support of that, we are in the process of establishing a responsible gaming program. That program will be guided by, and at a minimum, that program will include a self-exclusion option, inclusion of responsible gaming messages on all advertising, mailings, and throughout the facility, including ATMs, a responsible advertising policy, annual responsible gaming training of all employees, sharing of self-exclusions between all Penn facilities if a patron has elected to the establishment of a responsible alcohol service program, the implementation of play management features, and finally, the establishment of a responsible gaming center within the casino, which Mark just referenced. Touch on the second bullet just a little bit, the location. You know, Mark just mentioned it. Where does this center belong? I think collectively we wanted a space that was not isolated. I think you've seen in previous presentations that we've hit the mark on that. Our location and our space is on the pathway from the parking garage elevators to the casino floor. I think the goal there for us was to ensure there was no ambiguity about our position on responsible gaming. Certainly it is a priority for us. We wanted to over-deliver. The space is to locate this information center. From a building perspective, you know, right now we're in the process of framing that space out. On numerous occasions, I've heard conversations about being thoughtful as it related to how we position and how we brand responsible gaming. I would absolutely agree with that and hope that we carry that consideration forward. I think we need to be thoughtful. I'll look forward to continue working with Mark to ensure that the space is inviting, that it is comfortable, and that it fits in with the surroundings, that it integrates well with the surroundings. So with that, Mark or Marlene?
Thank you. That's great.
Steve Keel joined us as well and addressed the public health perspective of what we're trying to do, both in research in developing the brand and rolling out the responsible gaming program. I'm just going to touch on it very briefly. Director Keel would say that we need to use a population-based approach, that it isn't just targeting one specific group, that we have a much broader approach. And what this would do is that it would allow you to prevention, across intervention, and across treatment and recovery. You would need to look for an approach that would be cost-effective. If you have a goal of rolling out something that would be statewide, that would have that sort of broad-based approach, you do need to take into consideration how much does this cost and how can you do that as effectively as you possibly can. And it needs to be comprehensive. Responsible Gaming Information Center is one specific type of method, and within that method, you can use a variety of different practices. You need to be able to roll it out, extend beyond that Responsible Gaming Information Center, and roll it out also further within the casino, within online media, within other type of branding opportunities in the community groups. So you need to think about this in a much broader perspective than just how does this apply, what will this look like within one specific method. I'm going to talk a little bit about British Columbia Lottery Corp's journey with how they conceptualized and how they came along to adopt a game services as a brand. Similar to the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, Paul Smith, their Director of Corporate Responsibility, said responsible gaming gaming is seen as the programming focused on educating consumers about gambling and supporting healthy choices about their gambling. And I think this goes back to this idea of healthy choices. We can talk about it in terms of prevention, we can talk about it in terms of responsible gaming, but we're also talking about making healthy choices about if they choose to gamble. Let's talk about making healthy choices in this area. This isn't real clear, but they took a very straightforward approach initially before adopting GameSense. And so this is a couple photos from before they adopted GameSense. So it would be in or around 2008. You can see on the photo on the left, they too have on-site space within the casino venue. It's very centrally located. You can see it's in fact on. They had it looks very good. It looks very nice. They called it the Responsible Play Information Center. They had information about how slot machines work, very informative. They had information that flowed nicely into a discussion about a self-exclusion program, which is the timeout brochure. But the problem, so what is when they went out and asked people, what they said is that strategy, that campaign, they were being seen as the gambling police. It was intended only for people with problems. So by and large, what people were saying is, this isn't for me, this is for that person over there. Even though they supported the idea that British Columbia was taking the initiative to promote responsible gaming, it was, and that to be even more direct, it was being impersonal, overbearing, and authoritative. All of these things, this isn't what I think that the Gaming Commission or anybody else would want to have the impression. So they went through a process of changing their strategy. They developed a brand positioning statement. We promote a positive approach to play with our groups there. So they're talking about their customers, people who are coming to their facilities. They're also talking about the general public. They went further to talk about what they were hoping to promote. So instead of being authoritarian, the gambling police, overbearing, what they wanted to create was a brand and a strategy that said we're trustworthy, that we're proactive, that we're effective and transparent. We truly want to be helpful to what Lance was talking about, that there needs to be an element of fun there. I think that clearly the gaming establishment that Penn is building, they want there to be an element of fun there. And I think that having that blend seamlessly into this space, it makes a lot of sense. I'm going to show you just a couple of the video clips that tried to tie into what they were to this new brand. I'm sorry, but before that, I'm going to talk about those branding standards. So I apologize, I got ahead of myself. Along with that brand, they developed GameSense, and GameSense has very specific standards that would be applied to it. How it's what is the overall look and feel that their material is attempting to achieve. And this is a few photos from the GameSense information centers, whereas before I showed you photos of what their responsible gaming information centers looked like before they adopted GameSense. This is what they looked like afterwards. Getting rid of the term responsible gaming and using only the term GameSense to talk about how they promote responsible gambling. And if you could look, these are actually 3 different photos. In the middle photo, so the photo on the left is just a carousel with some brochures. The photo in the middle it shows, I think, the Responsible Gaming Information Center, and you can see that there's it's kind of they too have a staff, and the staff they are called GameSense advisors. Okay, so here's a photo.
No.
So no. The odds are the same, no matter how many times you try. If you gamble, use your game sense.
Okay. Commercial that they developed. And I think that the point is you can talk about responsible gaming. You don't have to take it on directly. You can talk about it in a way that is humorous, that people will connect with. And here's another one.
Another thing I'd like to point out is that they say, if you gamble, use your game sense. That gambling is always a choice, that people can make a decision to gamble or not to gamble. This is the final one.
Set a time limit.
Okay, and here is further examples of the type of online and social media that was developed by BCLC. These are interactive pieces of that. Okay. Okay. And this is very much in line with a lot of campaigns that I've seen where it talks about the myth-fact campaign. What are the myths about gambling? And an attempt to dispel those myths to promote responsible gaming. It also further promotes some responsible gaming messages, promoting to take a break. So 9 months after we evaluated it, it was an internet-based survey of 1,000 individuals, talking specifically about awareness of the responsible gaming initiatives. 18% compared to 12% had accessed at least one program.
What's the compared to mean?
Compared to, it was 9 months after they introduced GameSense, so there was a 6% jump in that short 9-month period, compared to 68% were aware of specific responsible gaming initiatives. 25% compared to 14% believed that responsible gaming programs were intended for them. Speaking of a targeted high-risk group, moderate gamblers were aware. Awareness had doubled from 16% to 32%. And at-risk players' awareness had tripled from 9% to 27%. So there was a broad recognition of GameSense. People, you could say, make an argument that people would not be aware of what GameSense was or what it was intended for, but that was clearly not the case. So I wanted to turn it over to Marlene to talk about, kind of bring back that conversation that we had in October of 2013 of the responsible gaming information.
Thank you, everyone, for the time this afternoon. I think one of the interesting pieces is that, this space is going to be, we're going to be able to use it in a way that is unconventional, right? In a way that's not being used in any other casino jurisdiction, at least here in the United States. And I was saying to Mark that I was at the Reentry Reform Summit at police and community policing and using that space that they have and inviting the public in, and that is something that no one ever thought of before, and it's really working. The coffee with cops and all these different ideas, and it just lends itself to the similar type of topic and conversation that we're having here, which is no one ever thought before that we would be inviting folks who are gambling into. So I think we're really onto something interesting, and I also think that it's something that's working right now with alcohol and drugs and other mental health disorders. And, I think Mark was referring to, last October I showed you a picture of a barbershop where they were doing work around drugs and alcohol and talking with folks as they were getting a haircut. And they had really good results related to that. So again, I think that's GameSense, I think, is an amazing piece, and I'm so excited that Mark is suggesting that come to Massachusetts, and I think we can really begin to build on that here. One of the things I really like about what they've done here is not only all the pieces that Mark already pointed out, but one of the things you may have noticed is that they, and there have been studies around this, and we've incorporated this into some of the work with the Mass Council, is that in itself is powerful. Also, it tends to be the color of hope and spring, renewal. So that's also a powerful piece, and one that I think should continue on in terms of that incorporation. The other thing that they've done is that you may have noticed, other than well, actually not even in the videos, they have used no gambling paraphernalia. So the nice thing about this branding piece also being targeted to folks who are gambling at a fairly regular base, and that everyone's getting the same message. And I think that's really key, that everywhere they go, they hear the same thing, that they're seeing the same phone numbers, that they're getting the same messages. That universal approach tends to work very well in prevention, and goes back to the population-based approach that Mark referred to earlier. Centers or responsible gambling information centers, we really have to settle on a name. I think I've called them 5 different things since they were introduced. I think that the most important thing is that we meet people where they're at, right? So someone walks in the door and they want to have a really serious private conversation. They can do that with one of those staff members, whether they're called Game Sense advisors or someone else. But if someone wants to come in and just take a break, they're able to do that. So there's it's going to be nuance in terms of how that space is set up, and some of the programming that takes place there, because it really needs to meet a continuum of needs in terms of the folks interested in walking in. I think it needs to be engaging. Activities need to be happening there. So it's one thing for it to just be an on-site treatment, but I think offering things that pull people in, and again, giving them the opportunity to stop, take a break, think about what they've been doing, where they are, and certainly they may decide to go back and resume their gambling activities, or they may decide to leave for that day. And again, giving them that space and opportunity to make some informed decisions. And I think that's the key piece, is that really is leading us through all of the things that we're thinking about related to this space. The work that has been successful for folks with other types of addictions, as well as mental health disorders, mindfulness, offering calming music and meditation, things that people can do on their own, or maybe with a little bit of a guide. Again, that advisor can step in and help with that, but those can be things that can be incorporated into this. Exercise has been shown to be resisting urges when it relates to addiction. Can we have folks doing a little yoga when they walk in this center? There's a number of possibilities that are really low cost, fairly effective, easy to incorporate. Excuse me. Even considering maybe having some type of food in there, healthy food. There's a number of options. There's a number of things to think about when it relates to this space. So when you think about these Game Sense advisors, or again, whatever we end up calling them, that they are not only just a trained clinician who knows about gambling. That's what we already have in Massachusetts, a number of them. But they really are skilled in some of these other things, and that they can meet people where they are at when they walk in. So similar to what we do when we answer a helpline call, we really need to actually be listening to that person at the end of their phone call. And other people really want to know, why me? How did I end up here? Or do I know how to gamble right? I think there's going to be a wide variety of people who are walking in with a wide variety of issues, and I think there's going to be some really detailed training that's going to go into getting those advisors ready for those initial people walking in. I also think that technology is going to from the gaming floor and bring them in, and then also sending them back out. And again, that's going to be a lot of connection and synchronization with the licensees in terms of how they train their own staffs, and how the staff's trained in here, and how the technology and the connections with this brand is going to flow between the various spaces. I'm so thrilled that Penn is already thinking so strategically about their space and making it comfortable and well suited to folks being able to walk in and walk out and access these services.
So this goes back to the conversation about practices and methods, and I think that there's a variety of different practices and methods that we could and should adopt from, and I think that Game Sense is a very good possibility of a way that we launch this variety of practices and methods to talk about responsible gaming, to be able to, if we talk about play management, It could be this. It would be game sense tools. That would be just one example. But regardless of how it plays out, engaging, working closely with Penn, MGM, WIN, Massachusetts Council on Compulsive Gambling, other significant stakeholders to figure out those strategies is ultimately going to be very important. Also very important in this, is how it's evaluated. And just as BCLC had initiated an evaluation component, I'll talk into my recommendation within the research agenda that I'll talk about next. So, that I have a couple recommendations. The first recommendation is that the Massachusetts Gaming Commission adopt GameSense as a brand to communicate and promote responsible gaming information and resources and programs in Massachusetts. So I've had discussions with BC, the user agreement or a license agreement that is in your packets. I've reviewed that license agreement and with Council Grossman. There's been some exchange back and forth with BCLC about the details of that agreement. That agreement was posted on Combuys as a best value, so we would be free to execute such a license agreement with BCLC if you choose. Another important consideration is cost, and while it's outlined in that license agreement, there is no cost for this. In fact, I think that is obviously a very good thing. And in fact, there would be the opportunity to work collaboratively with BC, collaboratively new materials. So materials that they would develop, we would be able to use here, much like the resources that you saw there. And likewise, if there were materials that we developed that would align this more closely with Massachusetts, I would recommend that we seek to share that with the other jurisdictions that are using GameSense. There are 3 other jurisdictions in Canada that are using it, and I had meant to bring that information with you.
Nobody in the States?
Nobody in the United States is using it. It's used exclusively in Canada at this point. Okay. So my second recommendation then is to procure services with an experienced marketing company to further develop the GameSense brand and implement a media strategy for Massachusetts. A great starting point. I think that there are ways that we would want to further develop that. Again, I think Marlene had some good ideas, Lance has good ideas, others, but we would want to make sure that this is tailored specifically for Massachusetts. And we would seek to the experience of a marketing company to do that. I think that there would also a marketing company would allow us the ability or help us with that.
Elaine, does Jackrabbit have the capacity to do this?
Yes, I would say that they do.
Do they?
I think there are several others if
Yeah.
we need to do a lot. The bottom line is that there are actually a few agencies in Massachusetts.
Well, there's plenty that could do it. I just was thinking that's one we know of.
Yeah.
That second recommendation would run?
We have a budget line item right now that is, I think it's right around $400,000 for a marketing strategy, but that was to develop the brand in addition to rolling out our marketing strategy. My recommendation would not be that much that's there. So in a lot of ways, there's a huge cost savings in this that the work of a brand is already done. It's done and it's proven. We take that, we tweak it, we make modifications to it, but then we do the rollout in Massachusetts.
Lance, I mean, a lot has been made about the logo, the color, the appearance. Is there anything that get too close to what this looks like, or is it something that would make it separate and distinct?
You know, I think it's a fine line. You want it to blend, right? Certainly in a perfect world, it fits in very nicely amongst the other surroundings. But certainly you want it to have its own characteristics and own charm. So, you know, speaking with Mark, I wanted to be certain about what our obligations, so we're on the same page, is that's something that will certainly fall under Mark. no concerns, right? I think, well, we can tell just how thoughtful we're being in this process, which is greatly appreciated, because the last thing I think any of us want is to have this roll out poorly and to have it stick out like a sore thumb. It's got to be part of the facility, right? It just does. It's got to be inviting. It's got to be comfortable. We're headed in the right direction. I do think at this point, though, the devil's in the details. And though we've been thoughtful and given lip service to the importance of positioning and branding responsible gaming, I think we need to see that through to the finish line.
Penn is, I think it's amazing. It's great. I've seen the location that's been outlined in your plans. We've talked about it, and I have a space that integrates well, that it isn't that space where nobody wants to go to because it sticks out like a sore thumb, that we need to do this as well as Penn is doing their facility.
It's really, I mean, it's a really good point. It's, you know, they're collaborating with us a lot, and we got to make sure we don't undercut the quality of their place with our facility.
These may be part of the details that you were talking about, but who would do the outfitting? Who would be responsible for specifying those specs, if you will, and then executing them? Is there an understanding as to what that may be?
I think that is something where we would look to the marketing company to help us kind of spec that out and help develop that look and that feel.
I meant the actual construction and fit out of the space. Not hiring a contractor to come, do the painting of that space, are we?
I had envisioned that this could be contracted through the marketing company, and that would become a project within that specific contract.
Oh. Well, let's circle back on that, because I had envisioned something entirely different. I think the strategy and a theme and a design, but ultimately, a general contractor, either already on site or about to finish up, would actually execute what it looks like.
Those might be some of the devils in the details.
Right. Those are the details that I'm talking about.
Yeah, and Penn has already said they're willing to collaborate, so it sounds like you'll work out all those details. And the whole concept is really, it's really interesting, as opposed to, the visuals were really good to see the difference, and, how the second location was much more open and inviting than the first.
Yeah,
I like the collateral material that you showed us. It kind of looked like a blend of TD Bank and GameStop, but it's a good blend right in the middle.
Okay, anything else? Yeah. We need a vote, I believe, on this. Commissioner Stebbins?
Sure, we got two pieces, right? Mr. Chairman, I move that the mass game, subject to our legal department's review, enter into the license agreement as presented with British Columbia Lottery Corporation for the purposes of using their Game Sense marketing campaign.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Mr. Chairman, I would also move that RFP to procure services to a marketing company to further develop the Game Sense brand strategy and implement such a plan for Massachusetts.
Could I suggest that we just say direct the staff to procure services? They may or may not want to do an RFP. I don't know how that, what kind of procurement mechanism they're going to use. So, second, that amendment?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Great.
Thank you.
Good work.
Good job.
Good work,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Marlene.
Thanks, Marlene.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Marlene.
Lance.
Thanks, Lance. Okay, you're up again.
I am. Here I go. For the, actually, I'm sorry, it's the recommendations for play management. So on December 4th, the Commission voted unanimously to require gaming licensees to offer voluntary limit-setting tools as part of a play management system, and direction was given for numerous changes to the recommendations. I bring back before you these revised requirements for the play management system, and I won't read them unless you would like me to, but they are listed here.
I had a couple of questions, or
Sure.
it's page 2. On number 11, there's a thematic point that I'm going to make relative to this test or pilot that we talked about. That I know, Commissioner. There's limit setting tools on number 11 are coordinated with other tools. And there's all examples, A through F. Part of the idea that we discussed was that we would try to figure out just what would be most in the idea here, but it's a broad statement that I suppose we have not yet figured out, and the whole point is that we would try to investigate that. We were going to be doing this evaluation that I know is part of the next recommendation, or this analysis, as to try to figure out just what is most effective. The same point applies to the couple two comments I had earlier.
Okay.
Where it says that we're requiring gaming licensees to offer the voluntary limit setting tools, which may be the end point, but I understood it based on the prior discussion that at least for these one license more get a better understanding of what this would cost and what would be most effective, that we were doing these on a test basis, if you will. I know that that's not necessarily what this is saying, but I grabbed onto that thought at the beginning of that paragraph 2 in that page, where it says that the play management tools are mandatory for licensees to offer. So when you take all those three small edits, I guess, or small points, I was under the impression that we had all agreed to test these with pen for this period of time, and then eventually come out with is a requirement or not.
Are you saying that it shouldn't be required on all machines because it's just a test? Is that what I don't understand what you're saying.
No, I don't know that it's required of all licensees.
So,
I see.
If I may, play management tools are mandatory on all electronic gaming machines. Would that satisfy it?
No, he's saying that it says licensees, and we're only talking about pen.
Right.
Question that this was going to be a test.
That's correct.
They've agreed to it.
Right.
We can require it at any time, obviously, but the way this reads is that it's now required. And my impression was different. My impression was we've agreed to go with pen. They've agreed. There's a lot of details that we have to sort out, and that ultimately the requirement to have now.
Well, the requirement to have, required of all licensees.
Yes.
Was put on.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right, but they're not going to have any for 2 years, but yeah,
Right.
we could change it if you wanted to. Make it apply, just change the language so that it only applies to the Category 2 license for the time being.
Okay.
We can easily revise this memo when.
Understanding that the play management tools would be applied to all electronic gaming machines within that
Yes.
facility. Okay.
Well, although remember, we just had a discussion as to whether in order to test this effectively and really evaluate the efficacy, we might have to have some machines not offer it to really understand the right?
That goes to the formulation of the test, right?
Precisely.
Right.
But again, if you want to be, Enrique is right, this says something that we may not be requiring. We don't know whether we're going to want it on all machines. That's going to depend on the evaluation contractor. So you could tweak that language too. You know, the other thing, as long as we're going to redo this, the thing that, we did agree that but this probably should be written to reflect more clearly what Commissioner Zuniga is talking about, which is what we decided on is to use the 2-year window of the Category 2 license to find out, if we can, whether these things are effective for the cost involved in using them. And that's, you know, we didn't adopt a play management system for all licensees in Massachusetts. Exactly what we did do. Do you understand what I mean, what I'm saying?
No. So I do understand that this is a trial, this is a test. Penn has agreed to do that. But it's also my understanding that we intend to promulgate regulation to reflect that at this point. But that there is a set period in which we would try this out, evaluate it, and determine whether or not the benefit would warrant it being applied to other operations or gaming licensees, gaming establishments in Massachusetts.
Right.
But that test, conceivably, depending on what the test protocol is, may incorporate provisions where you had some machines that didn't have it. It's conceivable. Maybe not.
But even, I think even on December 4th, the MGC voted unanimously to require gaming licensees to offer voluntary limit setting tools as part of a play management system. I don't know what the exact words of the vote were, but that was clearly not what we did.
That's a fine point.
Right, which is a system, offer a play management system for at least the 2-year exclusive window of the Category 2 license, and to conduct a rigorous evaluation to find out whether or not we think it works.
That's right.
And that's not what you say here. And I take Enrique's point that we should be a little more explicit. If you just gave this to somebody, they would not understand what we really did agree on.
Okay.
Did you get it? Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure, yeah, I do.
Okay. So do you want to, did we have a vote on this?
We did.
I mean, we could.
I'm trying to get the transcript right here.
Oh, okay, good.
No, I never heard the part about some machines not offering it, though, because
No, we didn't.
Right, because I don't know how that would work, frankly.
Well,
because-
But it's up, all we're saying is it's up to the evaluator. We don't know how they're gonna do the test on this thing. But if it's the way we can do it, that's what we would do.
Because that's the way we could actually measure just how much people are utilizing a system based on awareness, right? But that, we had a preliminary conversation with a potential evaluator, and that's an idea that they put forward.
Oh, okay, so I missed that part.
Yes.
You had a separate
Yes.
conversation that we didn't, okay, that's
Yes.
where I'm,
One approach.
okay.
We haven't engaged anybody.
So it seems like you would say, let's leave that piece open based on recommendations of an evaluation team of how we would approach it.
Just write it in a way that it permits both. I mean, it just
Yeah.
say may require.
The idea was larger, which is just what the chairman agreed with. You know, this was all agreed to be a trial basis process to figure out just what tools we want to continue based on hard evidence. Whether we put that in regulations or not, I'm less concerned about. I'm concerned about the principles that we agreed to, which are not reflected here.
As far as I'm concerned, we could either agree to adopt this now, subject to Director Van der Linden. I think it makes much difference.
It's fine by me, either way.
Well, I had one other thing that I think I need to put in here, because we spent a lot of time talking about it last time, and it's not in here, and that's the other one I mentioned to you earlier. And that is, we agreed that the entry method would be a proactive opt-in.
That's right.
That's not here.
So maybe on that count.
I think it needs to be, so that a point of some concern to all three licensees, and we spent a lot of time talking about it. It should come right after. It was former number 9 in the old one. It should come right after 9 and before 10 in this new version, in my view.
So
maybe we
in
ought
other
to.
words, you're saying play management tools are voluntary for players to
It's voluntary. I mean, we had that long conversation last time, and we settled on your phrase, proactive opt-in, because you had to make a decision one way or another.
Right.
You had to you could opt out. All those are voluntary.
Yep,
But we
okay.
settled that issue, and I just want to make sure that we all realize we settled it for the test period. And I don't want to get into a situation where we go back.
Same thing, right? All of those were opt-in. You didn't have to do all of those things to be part of the program. Those were all kind of opt-ins.
Right. And those they're coordinated with. And so if you think about the GameSense information centers and there's a suite of different tools that would be available, limit setting tools would be coordinated with that. It wouldn't be required that they.
Correct. Take the quiz.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So just to make my proposal and what I thought we had done concrete, is I would recommend adding a new 9 or a new 10 after the current 9 that says the system will operate on a proactive opt-in basis with periodic who do not exercise the option to opt in or who do not opt in. Because the phraseology in current 10 was the phraseology that we used when the initial thing was drafted to say you had to make a choice one way or the other, decline specifically.
So this a proactive opt-in basis.
Basis with periodic invitations to patrons who do not opt in.
Who decline to use.
Well, you don't have to decline. You don't do anything.
Yeah, well, okay.
I mean, I just want to make that, we spent so much time on this.
Okay.
May I make a suggestion and perhaps a motion that we just revise there, or I or both of us look at it, with the revisions discussed herein, and the topics we brought up, and maybe a review of the prior discussion, and go forward, or?
Sure, but that's fine, because the last time we talked about a trial period, and what we did last time was adopted regulation promulgation. We adopted the 15 recommendations contained in the document with the subject to the changes we made the last time. That's what we approved
Right.
last time. We want to go through it again. I would like to take a look at the final thing during this informal.
Let's do that.
I guess we can't do it informal. I would just like to have it, you go ahead and do it, and then I would like to have it brought back before the commission.
Well, let's do that then. Maybe, the next meeting.
In principle, I think this is fine.
Yep.
We're there. We're just tweaking it.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
But the tweaks are important.
Yeah, they are important. Okay, so we'll bring this back for a final vote, final adoptive vote at the next meeting.
Great. Okay, next agenda item is recommendations for the annual research. So section 71 of chapter 20.
I'm sorry, excuse me, Mark.
Yes, sir.
Given the timing, Commissioner Zuniga and Director Van der Linden, should we, or do we need to authorize Mark, in collaboration maybe with Rick and council to procure an evaluation contractor? And I don't know, they could procure it and bring it back to us for our approval, but I think we need to authorize Mark. If maybe we don't even really need to do that, I guess maybe. Do we need to authorize Mark to get moving on contracting with an evaluation contractor?
Yeah, we don't have to authorize them, but that's something obvious that we can start. We can start that process.
Have for the record here that we're on our way. We got to get that contractor going quickly.
Right. And that fits very well within the recommendations of the research agenda as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good point.
Okay. So section 71 of chapter 23K directs the commission with the advice agenda in order to understand the social and economic effects of expanded gaming in the Commonwealth and obtain scientific information relative to neuroscience, psychology, sociology, epidemiology, and etiology of gambling. To that end, I have gone through an extensive process to introduce recommendations of this research agenda to a number of different bodies too. It's coming back before the commission at this point. So on October 6th, the annual research agenda recommendations described on page 2 were presented to the Public Health Trust Fund Executive Committee. And it's the Public Health Trust Fund Executive Committee who has authority to authorize expenses out of the Public Health Trust Fund. On October 21st, the recommendations were presented to the recommendations but advised minor revisions, which are reflected in the recommendations that I bring before you. On November 20th, I brought the recommendations to the Gaming Commission here. And on December 16th, 2 days ago, the research agenda and recommendations were presented to the Gaming Policy Advisory Committee as directed with one minor revision to it. And that also is reflected in the final recommendations that I present to you today.
What was that minor revision, may I ask?
Yeah, that minor revision applied to recommendation number 2, which stated, so to add the word benefit to responsible gaming initiatives. So as it analyzed data and report findings to determine the effectiveness and benefit, whereas before it just said effectiveness, of responsible gaming initiatives outlined.
Fair enough.
Okay, is everybody familiar with the 3? And then as you pointed out, my suggestion is incorporated into your 3rd recommendation, authorized to procure them.
Incredibly high priority, and it's I think to make sure that we evaluate the play management systems, and not just the play management systems. I think that we have there's a lot of things that we have moving out here. Play management systems is one. There's I'll go ahead and call it a Game Sense Information Center is another. That these are unique, innovative ideas, and as good as they may be, I think at what we're doing, so that we can only improve on what we're doing here is so important.
I agree, and I have some specific ideas to make these this procurement or this exercise let us build on what we've done in the past. So I'll come talk to you after this and
Great.
So you want to make a motion on these recommendations?
Sure. I would move that this commission approve the recommendations for the 2015 annual research agenda as outlined here in the packet.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Unanimously.
Great. Thank you.
And I believe, Director Day, that is the end of the day. Is that right?
That is, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.